Hey guys, I'm Tom the Tech Chap, and this stunning machine is the new Razer Blade 15 Advanced mid-2019 edition. Now, as you can see, I'm not in the normal studio at the moment, but I couldn't wait to share this with you. And the big upgrades is a 240Hz refresh display that's up from 144, and we've also got 9th gen processors. We've got the i7 9th gen in here, along with an RTX 2070 Max-Q, 16 gigs of RAM. And yeah, it's a bit of a powerhouse, but it's also extremely expensive. This model, around £2,500, spec it to the max, go crazy, you're paying over £3 grand. But the problem is, just how often are you actually gonna get 240 FPS in your games when you have Max-Q cards? Well, I'm not really sure if we're gonna max that out in AAA games and take full advantage. So potentially, the previous model with 144, a little bit cheaper, might be a better option. If you do fancy buying this particular laptop for yourself and you've got pretty deep pockets, then check out scan.co.uk where you can buy it now, and I put a link to it in the description below. So let's get on to the big upgrade, the matte 240Hz 1080p screen. That's the highest refresh rate you'll find on any gaming laptop, but the competition is right there too with the Asus Strix Scar 3, Alienware M15, the HP Omen 15, Gigabyte Aero 15 among others, with similar screens and specs. So why 240Hz? Well, refreshing the screen that many times a second means that games will feel super smooth, and it gives you kind of instant responsiveness that makes it difficult to go back to using normal 60Hz screens. Even everyday tasks feel really smooth, and it's a genuine pleasure to use. So in the past, 240Hz displays were always TN panels with washed out colors, poor contrast, and terrible viewing angles. So it's big news that we finally have one here with an IPS display, which addresses all of those problems. But crucially, it also minimizes the response time issues which limited IPS models in the past. I found it really responsive, and a clear IPS picture at such high frame rates just looks amazing. Having said that, it's nowhere near the best IPS for color accuracy or contrast, and it doesn't really get that bright either, which is the biggest problem. It is worth mentioning though that we don't get a G-Sync panel here, but that's because it's not really possible due to the need for dynamic switching between the integrated graphics and the GPU. With the 2070 Max-Q, you can expect most recent AAA titles to hit more than 60 FPS at high settings, which is great, but you're gonna have to seriously turn down settings to get triple-digit frame rates and take advantage of that higher refresh rate. But really, it's competitive gaming that this screen is really meant for, and where that responsiveness comes into its own. I can't really show you how smooth this is on a 30 FPS video, so you'll kind of have to take my word for it. I managed to get the full 240 FPS in CSGO at times. It's smoother than any shooter experience I've ever had. Overwatch was nearly as good with an average 200 FPS on low settings. In Apex Legends, I was able to get an average of 125 FPS using low settings, although it's still a bit too demanding to get anywhere near that magic 240Hz. Battlefield 5 got an average of 90 FPS, again using low settings. This still looks great though, and is very smooth and playable. And finally, I was able to get around 100 FPS in PUBG, which was surprisingly poor considering just how bad that game looks using very low settings. So you can whack everything to low and get the best frame rate, or you can turn things up a little bit, and also use Nvidia's real-time ray tracing, which is available on these RTX graphics cards. It's finally usable without completely destroying your frame rate, and it's a definite plus if you want the best looking experience. Turn it on in Battlefield 5 or Metro Exodus with high settings, and you can expect a consistent 60 to 70 FPS. So in practice, really the 144Hz screen would be more than enough if you're planning on using graphically intensive games. For longer gaming sessions, I did find the laptop got quite warm to the touch, especially above the keyboard, but the keys themselves and the touchpad were cooler, so it wasn't too uncomfortable. Also, the Razer was pretty much silent when idle or under light use, but even when the fan span up, the noise wasn't too obtrusive. As for battery life, we get an 80 watt-hour battery. The Razer says should be good for up to 6 hours. In my testing though, I reckon you'd be pretty lucky to get near that. In an hour of mixed use, I found the battery dropped nearly 35%. After an hour of watching video using the better battery life setting, mid-level brightness and RGB keyboard on, I was down by 45%. That's pretty shocking actually, so for gaming and media on the go, you're not going to want to be too far from a plug socket. Design-wise, I mean, there's only one way of describing this really, and it's like a stealth MacBook Pro. With that black anodized aluminium body, this big trackpad, if Apple made gaming laptops, this would be it, although we do have a glowing three-headed snake on the back and full chroma RGB keyboard, but it's a beautiful laptop, thin and light. Razer say it's the most compact 15-inch gaming laptop on the market, and it weighs about 2.2 kilograms. A good selection of ports, including Thunderbolt 3, HDMI, we've got Gen 2 USB 3As, but these have had a bit of an upgrade as well. We're looking at USB 3.2 Type A ports, so they're 20 gigabits per second throughput, which is a little bit faster, so if you're transferring files, then that'll be a bit quicker. And also in terms of Wi-Fi connection, we actually have the latest Wi-Fi 6 chip in here. Now you will need a compatible router, or router if we're in the States, to get use of that, but it is basically future-proofing, and it should mean that we get a little bit faster internet, but crucially it's more reliable and more stable, which obviously is pretty important if you're playing online competitive games, and you can't get away with blaming the lag for just being a bit. The bezel around the screen is pretty thin, and you get a 720p webcam up top and an IR sensor so you can lock it with Windows Hello. Either side of the keyboard we get two up-firing speakers, and they actually sound pretty decently loud and clear, but they are lacking in bass. The power connector on the left of the laptop is reversible, but I don't really like that in one direction it makes accessing the closest USB port a bit tricky, and it's also really tight-fitting. Hunting for the slot is fiddly, and quite often it feels like I'm scratching the chassis. I also really love the massive trackpad on this thing. It's responsive, your fingers just glide nicely over the surface, and it looks pretty good. Also, the full per-key RGB lighting on the advanced keyboard is fantastic, and you can control everything using the Razer Synapse software. It gives you pretty much unlimited lighting combinations. Compatible titles also have custom lighting presets, which automatically link with the Razer software when you boot up the game, such as Apex Legends. As for the keys themselves, they have a nice tactile feel, but ideally I'd want a little bit more travel for gaming, but in a form factor like this, it's fine. The screen and the processor options you can choose from are limited depending on which graphics card you choose. You'll need to go for the GeForce RTX 2070 or the 2080 Max-Q to get the 240Hz screen, and you'll need the 2080 Max-Q to access the OLED 4K panel. As the Blade 15 is such a powerhouse, you may also want to use it for creative work, but if you do, I'd suggest going for the 60Hz 4K IPS or the OLED touchscreen options instead for their much better image quality. High-spec models get an i7-9750H, while lesser versions get access to a 144Hz screen and are mostly limited to last-gen i7-8750H CPUs. In this Razer Blade, you can only get 16 gigs of RAM. It tops out at that, even the top spec model, which is fine for gaming, but if you're a creator or a developer, or maybe you want to use this as a work laptop as well, you'd probably benefit from 32. But the good news is you can upgrade it yourself up to a maximum of 64. It just feels a bit tight from Razer's part, maxing this out at 16 gigs when you're paying all that money. So should you buy it? Well, if you play games where you think you can get those extra frames and it'll help you play competitively, then yes. For everybody else, I'd save around £200 and go with a 144Hz panel and 8th gen processor. In benchmarks, I've seen there's hardly any difference between the i7-8750H and the 9750H for gaming, so that shouldn't really be a main consideration. But what do you make of the new Razer Blade 15 Advanced mid-2019 edition? Would you go for one of these? Do you think it's too expensive, or given the specs and the features, it's worth the price? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time right here on the Tech Chap.